everyone, welcome to Trucking Safety with Sam Watts. I am so glad that you are here listening to this podcast or watching this podcast, whatever you are choosing to do. But I'm just so happy that you've chosen to listen and you've chosen to tune in to Trucking Safety with Sam Watts. I, of course, am Sam Watts, and I am back in my studio today because if you remember the last episode, I took a field trip up to the Trailer Trash Podcast studio, which was better than mine. But, you know, it's nice to be home, shall I say. But excellent people up there. Make sure that you're tuning in to the Trailer Trash Podcast if you want a completely uncensored, unfiltered, and unique look and experience of the trucking community, which I do. I enjoy that. So it's kind of nice to, venture off the beaten path every once in a while and see what else is out there. So, but now we're back in our little studio here, talking about safety, talking about trucking safety. And one thing, like I've said from the very beginning, we're doing building blocks here. Okay. We're laying the foundation for trucking safety. That's what we're doing. And if you don't have a good foundation, then you're not going to have a good safety program. It's just the way it is. So what my goal with this podcast is to build that foundation for everybody so that if you are in a trucking safety role, you have an idea of what you should be doing. Or if you're not in a safety role per se, but you're in the transportation role, it's a good way for you to understand how this works. Because here's the deal. I may have said this before, maybe not, but it's 100% true. Safety is not just for the safety supervisor, safety managers, or directors of safety. It is for the entire company, okay? And if the head of the company is not buying into the safety program, nobody is going to buy into the safety program. That's just the way it is, okay? I didn't make the rules. Trust me, I tried, and they wouldn't let me. But you have to be a company that is focused on safety. And in order to do that, you have to have your safety program or your safety safety department. There we go. I knew I'd get it. Safety department. You have to have your operations. You even have to have accounting, understanding what safety is. Now, they might not have to go into the deep dive of safety. That's where your safety department really should shine. But everyone needs to know what's going to happen or what needs to happen in safety. Because here's the deal. If operations doesn't know safety, then they're going to tell your drivers to do illegal things. And since your drivers are maybe in trouble or they don't want to get in trouble and they might be a little too timid, shall we say, to speak up, or quite frankly, let's be honest here, some drivers are okay with doing illegal dispatches, okay? But if dispatchers don't know the safety protocol, they don't know that drivers can drive 11 hours, they don't know that they can work for 14, they don't know that they need a 10-hour break, then they're going to ask them to do stuff that the driver shouldn't be doing. And quite frankly, is illegal and will result in violations. And if you get multiple violations, your company gets shut down. Okay, that's just the way it is. I'm not here to scare anybody about it, but that's just what happens. Okay, FMCSA will catch up to you. The DOT will catch up to you if you are openly disregarding safety protocol. And so that's what I'm here to try to not have happen. Okay, and if there's safety people watching, great. Operations people, accounting, IT, sure, why not? Who cares, huh? You might have to know how the ELDs work. And especially at that C-level suite, everybody needs to understand how trucking safety works. And so that's why I started this podcast. And that's why, like I said, you got to lay that foundation. Okay. So we've gone over, driver qualification files. We've gone over the abbreviations and the all that kind of stuff when it comes to trucking. And now we're going to start diving a little bit more into some things that is maybe still equally important, but maybe not as widely known. So that's the goal. So we're still going to be pouring foundation parts. We're not completely done with the whole foundation, but we're going to kind of jump around a little bit here and whatever. So today I want to talk a little bit about the FMCSA and I want to talk about the basics categories. Okay. You've heard me talk about this before. If you listen to previous podcasts, the basics are how the FMCSA judges and grades a trucking company. Okay. So FMCSA, Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. Okay. They are the ones that enforce all the safety regulations that trucking companies have to abide by. They're the ones that have come up with the hours of service rules. They're the ones that are going to check that. They're the ones that, how they enforced how trucking companies hire drivers, okay, with all their background checks and stuff like that. The FMCSA is what makes all the rules in trucking. I mean, that's just basically it. So get to know them. I know a lot of guys like to fight against them and fight against regulations that they have, but they're not going away, okay? And I know this Chevron deal is becoming quite the hot topic. I don't think the FMCSA is going away. I don't think the Department of Transportation is going away. And let's be quite frank here, okay? And this is my opinion. That's why you tuned in to Trucking Safety, is for my hot takes. I don't think the FMCSA should go away. Like, I think they honestly have a lot of very good regulations. Now, that's not to say that there are some that I don't quite agree with. We're going to get into those. If you follow me on LinkedIn, you probably have seen a couple of things that I don't agree with. But hey, I think for the most part, the FMCSA is headed in the right direction. And I think that they are centered on drivers. I think they have a driver's mindset and the driver's best interest in mind. So I'm okay with the FMCSA. I know a lot of guys just want to like deregulate the whole thing and go back to the way it was in like the 70s and the 80s, but guess what? That's not going to happen. So you might as well learn the rules. You might as well get used to the rules, and you might as well play by the rules, because the rules are going to stick around, as they should. And so what the FMCSA has done is they have come up with basic categories. And if you go back to previous podcasts, you'll understand what BASIC stand for. It's behavioral analytics, something like that. Okay. Again, a good podcast host would have had that information in front of me. I can maybe look it up real quick, but I'm not going to, because I don't want to. Anyways, hang on. Here we go. Behavior analysis and safety improvement categories. Okay. You understand why maybe I don't have that memorized, because that's kind of a tough and a long one to remember. So anyways, behavioral analysis, I can't even say it, let alone remember it. Behavioral analysis and safety improvement categories, basics, okay? That's where they get the term from. There's 7 of them, okay? There's 7 different categories in these things, and each category has its own violations and measurements and all that kind of stuff that you have to abide by. And when a driver gets pulled over for a DOT check, they're going to be judged on pretty much all these basics, okay? Now, there's different levels to DOT enforcements and stuff like that, and we're going to cover that again in later podcasts. Like, there's level 1, level 2, level 3. Those are the basic ones. Basic. We're using that word a lot, aren't we? Those are your main ones. But there's more. There's more than that sometimes a driver will get looked at for. So anyways, we'll cover that later. But the basics, there's 7 basic categories. And right now we're going to quickly go through what they are. So the first basic category is unsafe driving. So this is going to be where if you have a driver that gets caught speeding, that's going to fall into the basics of unsafe driving. And to think of these basic categories, think of them like buckets, okay? So you have a bucket, you have 7 buckets in front of you. And each bucket is potential violations that could fall into them. So unsafe driving, get your unsafe driving bucket. That's going to have your speeding on there. That's going to have your illegal lane changes or lane violations, because there's sometimes where trucks, commercial trucks can't be in certain lanes. If they're caught in that, that's going to be unsafe driving. But the biggest one, and quite honestly, the biggest violation that a driver will get, that's like most prevalent in the trucking industry, is speeding. Okay. Even when the trucks are governed, drivers know how to get around that. So the speeding is going to be the big one, and that falls in the unsafe driving category. Again, there's a bunch of other ones, and you can go look. In fact, I've got the book here. If you're watching, you can see, this is a pretty thick book. This book covers all of the violations that fall into each category. So if you go through this book, you could take a look. And if you're just listening, you got to trust that I have a book in my hands here right now. But this book goes through everything. There is violations for every category. And unfortunately, they don't have them in the same order that I'm going. But, unsafe driving. There is, let's just take a quick peek while I have the book in front of me here, shall we? Unsafe driving. There is a total of 45 violations that could be tracked in the unsafe driving category. Okay. Like I said, speeding's a big one. Rolling through a stop sign or a stoplight is another big one. And then again, the hand use and stuff like that. Any sort of cell phone use, that's going to fall on unsafe driving. Okay. So just make sure you're aware of that. Tell your drivers to make sure that they're paying attention to the road. Now, the next one we're going to talk about real quick is Hours of service compliance. This is pretty straightforward. If there's issues with the ELDs and how your driver's tracking their time, that falls into the hours of service compliance bucket. Okay, so if your driver has violations for driving over the 11, working over the 14, they go over the 70-hour limit for the cycle, which is the most common one for over-the-road drivers. I know there's different cycles out there, but 70 hours is probably the most common one out there. Any violation that falls into that incorrect personal conveyance use, that all falls into the hours of service compliance. Okay. And now in probably one of the next podcasts or a close one, we're going to kind of dive a little bit deeper into how these affect it. Because if you get, let's just say, and I can't think, I can't guarantee this off the top of my head, but like if you get a driving over the 11 hours, okay, you drove over the 11 hours, you drove 12 hours, each violation has a rank and a weight to it. So the worse the violation, the higher the rank or the weight is going to be. It goes from 1 to 10. Okay, so not too bad of violations are 1 to 2s, and your bad ones are going to be 10s. Okay, and like I said, in a later podcast, we're going to dive a little deeper into that and how those scores are actually calculated to give you your CSA score. And I know it's not a score; it's a percentage. I'll show you how they do it. Kind of, okay? There's a lot of math involved, and quite frankly, I'm not even sure if the FMCSA understands all of it, but there is a kind of a little bit of method to their madness that we're going to dive into here in just a little bit. So, hours of service compliance is the next one that we are looking at. That's anything to do with ELDs. You're going to have the hours of service issue with that. Okay, vehicle maintenance. That's the next one. Pretty self-explanatory. If you have tire issues, brake issues, a lot of the CVSA blitzes that you see out there have to do with vehicle maintenance. And why? Because vehicle maintenance is extremely important, okay, when it comes to semi-trucks. You have really big vehicles out there pulling really heavy freight. They want to make sure that those vehicles are safe to be on the road, and that there's no issues with brakes, that there's no issues with tires, all that stuff. They want to make sure that vehicle maintenance is good. So any sort of brake violations, any sort of tire violations, any other issues with load securement, stuff like that, that's going to go against vehicle maintenance, okay? Just they want to make sure it's safe to be on the road. And I know the old joke is want to make sure the vehicles are safe to be on the road, but the roads are, pure junk. It's kind of funny because they really can go over vehicle maintenance with a fine-tooth comb. But there is a reason for it, okay? They want to make sure that there's no issues when it comes to that, so that could hurt innocent people who would just happen to be driving next to the vehicle. So vehicle maintenance is the next one. The next bucket is controlled substance and alcohol, okay? Again, pretty self-explanatory. You do not want your drivers high as a kite while they're driving down the road or drunk out of their mind driving down the road. Can we agree on that? I think we can. If we can't, we should probably have a conversation offline a little bit. But this is kind of becoming a big one because a lot of drivers now are saying, hey, marijuana is legal in states and, it's kind of like alcohol, whatever. I should be able to have some. And there's a kind of a fight going on right now between the feds and the state levels and FMCSA. Here's the deal. If you're a commercial driver, and this is, again, my opinion, my hot take. If you're a commercial driver, I understand that marijuana might be legal. I understand alcohol is legal and stuff like that. But you got to use common sense with this stuff, okay? You cannot drive an 80,000-pound rig down the road while you might be a little altered. Does that make sense? I wouldn't even do it in my personal vehicle, okay? So I don't want you behind the wheel of an 18-wheeler a little buzzed. Like, that's just not cool, man. So, but controlled substance, if your driver gets popped for being drunk or anything like that, that's where this would fall in, the controlled substance bucket. Okay, this one should stay as 0, okay? You really don't want guys in this bucket, okay? Now, kind of a little obscure one, if you haul hazmat, hazardous material compliance, okay? That's the next bucket. So any type of hazmat issues, and there's a lot that could happen in this one because there's a lot of issues that could go wrong when you haul hazmat stuff. It can be very dangerous, and so any sort of hazmat, any sort of leaking, anything like that, loose plugs and stuff, that all falls into the hazmat stuff, or not properly placarded. Okay, that's the other big one too. You got to know what you're hauling. You got to make sure that if it says, you need a certain type of placard, that you have that one out there. Okay. Now, you can get into an area where like you got the Hazmat 9 where it needs to be placard, but you don't need to have a hazmat license. That can get a little tricky. But for the most part, if you're going to haul hazmat and you need something placard, you better make sure that your driver has their hazmat certificate, okay, or their hazmat endorsement. Because if they don't, you're going to have some issues when it comes to that. Next one is driver fitness. Now, nothing to do with physical fitness. This just means, does a driver have a CDL? Does a driver have a med card? Is that med card certified with the state? Things like that. Should the driver be behind the wheel? That's kind of what we always ask. That's what this category does. So if you have a driver out there that doesn't have a valid CDL or has the wrong, CDL, like you have to have a CDLA, but they have a CDLB, like they can't be pulling an 18-wheeler. And so that's where this one kind of comes in. Also, a lot of times, and we might get into this again in a later podcast, is there's times where drivers don't know that their CDL has actually been revoked. Things could happen in their personal life that could affect their CDL. So there are times when a guy will get pulled into a scale and they go, you don't have a valid CDL. You're shut down now. The trucking company's got to come recover the load. That guy's got to find a way home because he can't drive the truck. So drivers really need to be on top of like expiration dates, anything like that could mess with their CDL because you do not want to get caught in that situation. Child support payments is a massive one, okay? If you are making child support payments, make sure that you make them because if you don't, they could take away your CDL. I'm just saying, okay? And if you don't self-certify your med card or certify it, turning it into the state, let them know you have it, that could take away your CDL, okay? You think I'm crazy? I've seen it. And then the last one is crash indicator. Again, exactly how it sounds. How many crashes you getting into? What's the ratio on that kind of stuff? They're working on tweaking this one right now, so I'm not going to dive too deep into it because they're trying to kind of put it out there. It used to be just any crash you're involved with gets put in there. Well, now they're trying to work out with, are you at fault and other kind of variables that they're working through this one. And I should say this too, with the basic categories, they are talking about tweaking some of them. So this podcast could be irrelevant in a year. Who knows? But if it is, I'll make a new one and we'll go from there. But crash indicator. How many crashes you getting into? Were there fatalities? Were there injuries? Did you have to be towed away? Things like that. That all kind of adds into that. So those are your 7 basic categories. We could do deep dives into all of them, and we might do it if you guys want to, so we could really see what's involved with all of them. But if you have an idea of what they are looking for, then you know what you need to be looking for, quite frankly. I mean, this is a good indicator to you, like, hey, does my driver have a CDL? Are my vehicles well maintained? Are the tires looking good? With the control system, are my guys, not drinking? That should be easy. I should watch their speed, all with all the technology we have now, we can see how fast these guys are going. So it's a good indicator for you, and I highly recommend you pick up one of these books. You can get them from other different places. I think I got this one from J.J. Keller. So, I mean, they're out there. Those are good resources for you to look through. But those are the 7 basic categories, okay? If you have questions about those, feel free to let me know, okay? There's a lot more that can go on in this, but I just wanted to give you kind of a brief overview of the basics, give you the basics of the basics. That might be the title of the podcast. Anyways, but that's it, okay? So, again, if you have questions, let me know. These can get somewhat complicated, but I really want you guys to understand how the safety department works. I want you to understand how we operate, how our minds think, and what we're looking for when it comes to that. So thank you very much for listening or watching, whatever you're doing. Feel free to rate this thing on Spotify or Apple, wherever you get it. Feel free to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. I would greatly appreciate it. And until next time, make sure that you are staying safe out there.